Chapter 18. The Keeper's Countermove. Word of Kane's defeat spread like wildfire, both among Adanna's allies and the Keepers. The group had barely caught their breath when the reality of their actions began to unfold. The allies they had rallied were emboldened, ready to take a stand against the Keepers. Villages that had once been paralyzed by fear began to mobilize, forming militias and fortifying their defenses. But Adanna knew their victory at Narrowan had only delayed the inevitable. A new threat. The group regrouped in the forest outside the ruins, where Cunnel paced anxiously. "We've struck a major blow," he said, "but the Keepers won't take this lying down. If anything, Kane's defeat will only make them more desperate." Amora floated nearby, her form flickering as her energy waned. "They'll send someone stronger. Kane wasn't their leader, he was their enforcer. The true mastermind hasn't revealed themselves yet." Torrik, sharpening his daggers, chimed in. "The Keepers will want revenge. They'll regroup fast, and when they come, they'll bring everything they have." Adanna nodded, her exhaustion overshadowed by determination. "Then we need to prepare. We can't just wait for them to strike. We have to stay ahead of them." Visions of the past. That night, as Adanna rested by the campfire, the familiar pull of the ancestral plane called to her. She closed her eyes and found herself in the vast expanse of shimmering stars, surrounded by the voices of her ancestors. One voice stood out, calm and powerful. "You have done well, Adanna," it said. A figure emerged from the starlight, an older woman with piercing eyes and frost-like energy flowing around her. "Who are you?" Adanna asked. "I am Asara, the first to wield the frost power," the figure replied. "You carry the legacy of our line, but there is much you do not yet understand." Adanna's brow furrowed. "Then help me understand." "The Keepers won't stop until they destroy the Veil and me." Asara stepped closer, her presence both soothing and commanding. "Your power is tied to the Veil itself. To protect it, you must master not only the frost but also the balance within yourself. Your emotions, your fears, they can either guide you or destroy you." "I'm trying," Adanna said, her voice tinged with frustration. "But it feels like I'm always one step behind." Asara placed a hand on Adanna's shoulder. "The bloodline's strength lies in unity. Trust your allies, and trust yourself. Together, you can overcome even the greatest darkness." The Keeper's new leader. Meanwhile, in the Keeper's hidden stronghold, a council of robed figures convened around a swirling pool of dark energy. "Kane has failed," one of them said, their voice dripping with disdain. "His failure is irrelevant," another replied. "The girl has proven herself a threat. The bloodline's power is awakening faster than we anticipated." A figure stepped forward from the shadows, their presence commanding absolute silence. Unlike Kane, who had been a brute force of destruction, this figure exuded an air of calculated menace. Their face was obscured by a mask, and their voice was cold and sharp. "She is no mere threat," the leader said. "She is the key. If we cannot destroy her, we will bend her to our will." The council murmured in agreement, but the leader raised a hand, silencing them. "Prepare the army. Begin the ritual to weaken the Veil further. And send a message to the girl. She must understand the price of defiance." A warning in blood. 2 days later, as Adanna and her group traveled to the next village to rally more allies, they stumbled upon a horrifying scene. The village was in ruins, its homes burned, and its people slaughtered. Adanna's heart sank as she stepped through the ashes, her hands trembling with both sorrow and fury. On the largest building, scrawled in blood, was a single message. "You cannot hide. Surrender, or this will be your fate." Amora's form flickered with anger. "They're trying to break you, Adanna. Don't let them." Cunnel knelt by one of the fallen villagers, his expression grim. This was no ordinary raid. They wanted to send a message. Torrik examined the message with narrowed eyes. "It's a trap. They want us to strike back in anger, to make a mistake." Adanna clenched her fists, frost creeping along her arms. "Then we won't give them the satisfaction. We'll fight smarter, not harder." Cunnel placed a hand on her shoulder. "The time to take the offensive is coming, but we must choose our moment carefully." Gathering the final allies. Determined to honor the fallen and strengthen their cause, The group pressed on. They sought out the final remnants of the old guardians, tribes hidden in the mountains, and even rogue keepers who had turned against their order. At each stop, Adanna's presence and determination inspired hope. Her mastery of her powers grew with each encounter, and the bond between her and her allies deepened. But with every victory, the shadow of the keepers loomed larger. Chapter 19: The Call to War. As the final pieces of their alliance fell into place, the group prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The keepers' forces were gathering, and the veil between realms was weakening by the day. Adanna stood before her assembled allies, warriors, mystics, and ordinary villagers who had chosen to stand against the darkness. "This isn't just my fight," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "This is about all of us, about protecting the balance, the veil, and everything we hold dear. The keepers think they can break us. But together, we are stronger than they can ever imagine." Cheers erupted, the sound echoing through the mountains. The final battle was on the horizon, and Adanna knew there was no turning back. Chapter 20: The Final Confrontation. The air was thick with tension as Adanna and her allies gathered at the base of the Keeper's stronghold, a towering fortress built into the heart of the mountains. Above, the sky seemed to ripple with an unnatural energy, a manifestation of the weakening veil between realms. The Keepers were readying their final ritual to tear it down entirely and merge the worlds. Adanna felt the weight of the moment pressing on her. They had come this far, but the true test of her strength, both as a leader and as a wielder of the frost, was about to begin. She turned to her companions. "We've trained, we've fought, and we've lost, but we've never given up. Today, we end this," she said, her voice resolute. Cunnel nodded, his axe resting against his shoulder. "We've got this." The Keepers underestimated the power of unity. Amora's energy flickered like a flame in the wind, but her gaze was sharp. "Their ritual will fail. I will make sure of it." Torrik adjusted his weapons, his eyes scanning the Keeper's fortress. "Let's make sure it stays that way. The assault begins." As they approached the gates, the ground trembled. From the shadows, Keepers emerged, warriors in dark robes, wielding weapons forged from the very energy of the veil. But the greatest threat was the figure at the gate, the leader who had taken Kane's place. "I've been waiting for you," the figure said, their voice as cold as the ice Adanna controlled. "You cannot win. You will kneel, or you will fall." Adanna's eyes blazed with the resolve of her ancestors. "I will never kneel." With a wave of her hand, ice erupted from the ground, sweeping across the battlefield. The Keeper leader raised their hand, sending waves of dark energy to meet it, and the two forces collided with an explosion of power that sent shockwaves through the air. "Stay focused," Cunnel shouted as he and Torrik charged into the fray, cutting down the Keeper soldiers that surrounded them. Amora's energy flickered wildly, disorienting the enemies around her as she worked her way toward the leader. Adanna followed, her ice dancing at her fingertips, but her focus remained on the dark figure in front of her. The battle for the veil. As Adanna clashed with the Keeper leader, the sky above them darkened further, and the ground beneath them shook. The ritual had begun, and they could feel the veil between worlds growing thinner by the second. The Keeper leader spoke again, their voice laced with a cruel smirk. "Do you not see? The veil is already crumbling. Your efforts are futile." Adanna's pulse quickened, but her resolve only strengthened. She was not fighting for just the veil, but for the very future of her people, her ancestors, and every life that had been touched by the Keeper's darkness. "You're wrong," she said, her voice a low growl. "This is where you fall." With a swift motion, she summoned the full power of the frost within her. Ice spiraled from her hands, forming a massive storm that swallowed the Keeper leader's dark energy. She could feel the immense power building, the ancient magic of her ancestors flowing through her veins, and with it came an overwhelming surge of ice and light. The Keeper leader screamed as the ice encased them, their dark power fading under the crushing force of Adanna's frost. Their mask cracked, revealing a twisted, desolate face, and with a final burst of energy, they shattered into nothingness, leaving behind only the faintest trace of dark energy in the air. But the battle wasn't over. The ritual was still in progress, and the veil between worlds was almost gone. The heart of the ritual. Adanna rushed to the center of the fortress, where the Keeper's ritual was reaching its climax. The chamber was filled with swirling dark energy, and a massive rift in the sky was beginning to form above them. The very fabric of reality seemed to be tearing apart. "We can still stop it," Amora shouted, her form flickering as she fought against the energy pulling her in. Adanna stepped forward, her hands outstretched. She could feel the overwhelming pull of the rift, trying to drag her into the other realm. But with every ounce of her will, she called on the ice, using the power of the frost to create a barrier around herself and the rift. "I won't let you do this," Adanna said, her voice strong. "The veil is sacred, and it will remain." The rift pulsed and screamed, its dark energy clawing at her, but she stood firm. Her ancestors' voices filled her mind, guiding her, urging her forward. The frost swirled around her, forming a barrier of crystalline light. With a final cry of determination, she thrust her hands into the rift. The final moment. A brilliant explosion of ice and light erupted from Adanna, and for a moment, the entire world seemed to pause. The rift snapped shut with a deafening sound, and the dark energy that had consumed the land dissipated into nothingness. The veil was restored, stronger than before, and the realms stood apart once more. The battlefield fell silent. The Keepers were defeated, their dark ritual shattered. The storm of darkness had passed. Adanna fell to her knees, utterly exhausted. But as she looked around, she saw her allies standing tall, their faces filled with relief and pride. Cunnel, Amora, and Torrik approached her, each offering a hand to help her stand. "We did it," Cunnel said, his voice full of awe. "Together," Amora added, her energy now calm and steady. Torrik gave a small smile. "I knew you could do it." The aftermath. The days following the battle were filled with healing and rebuilding. Villages that had fallen under the shadow of the Keepers were revived, and the people of Irua began to rebuild their lives. The veil was stronger than before, its power now more stable, and Adanna's name became one known far and wide, not just as a wielder of frost, but as a symbol of hope and unity. But Adanna knew that her journey wasn't truly over. The Keepers may have been defeated, but the world was still fragile. There would always be threats to the balance, and the role of the protector would remain hers for as long as she could carry it. Standing atop the highest peak of the mountains, Adanna looked out over the world she had fought to save. The sun was rising, casting its first light on the land, and for the first time in a long while, she felt peace settle over her. Her ancestors whispered to her on the wind, "The balance is yours to protect. But you are never alone." And with that, Adanna smiled, ready for whatever the future would bring. Epilogue: A New Dawn. Years passed, and the world Adanna had fought for flourished. The Keepers, now scattered and powerless, were no longer a threat. The veil remained intact, stronger than it had ever been. And Adanna, alongside her allies, continued to protect the balance of the realms. But her story was just one of many. She had inspired a new generation of protectors, young warriors, mystics, and dreamers who would rise up to defend the fragile peace she had fought so hard to create. As the sun set on the horizon, Adanna knew that her journey had been long, but the future was now in safe hands. And so, her legacy lived on, carried in the hearts of all those who believed in the balance between worlds. The end.